Pleasure and such an honor to be here in support of Kshama Sawant's re-election for City Council in Seattle. Kshama's re-election will help advance us all as we continue to build movements from the grassroots with elected officials who cannot be bought off by corporations. And it's a great honor to be here also with Chris Hedges, and we all know his well-known dedication and urging for a mass movement challenging the corporate elite. And finally, it's a great honor to be here with all of you who are here today because you understand the importance of our times and the essential role that each of us plays at this time in history. There is never a more important time than now.
And profound reform must confront. Because as every socialist, including Martin Luther King, understood, the power of the war machine hollows the country out from the inside until there's nothing left. Bridges collapse. Schools are closed, austerity is imposed, social programs are cut. And it was the corporatists who profit from war and the militarists at the end of World War II who conspired to create, even in peacetime, an economy that was geared for total war. And to perpetuate the psychosis of permanent war, where all who dissent are pushed aside, silenced, and imprisoned. Every socialist understands, as Karl Liebknecht once said, that in wartime, the most dangerous enemy is within. And this is the monumental task before us. For that fusion of war profiteers and militarists conspired not only to bleed us, but to make war on all of those programs that had been put in place by the New Deal. And let's not forget that the New Deal was not given to us because of the great beneficence of oligarchic white men like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Right. It was given to us because Roosevelt and the oligarchs were frightened, and they were frightened of radicals and socialists. And Roosevelt in 1930 writes a letter to a friend that said, "We must institute these reforms in order to prevent revolution." And he went to the oligarchs and he said, in essence, you better give up some of your money or you're going to lose all of your money. And we must rebuild radical movements that hold fast to that moral imperative, including the fundamental opposition to the masters of war, and make the power elites frightened of us once again. There's a scene in Kissinger's memoirs. Do not buy the book. It's 1971. There's a gigantic anti-war demonstration. Let's not forget that Nixon was our last liberal president, not because he was a liberal or had a conscience, but because he was frightened of movements. And Nixon had taken empty city buses and put them end-to-end around the White House as a barricade, and he stood at the window with Kissinger wringing his hands, going, "Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us." And that's where people in power have to be. That's the only language they speak. That's the only language they understand. And we are not going to be saved by charismatic or strong leaders. As Ella Baker reminded us, we are going to be saved by being strong people. The Wobblies landed in the docks of San Francisco to support a strike. And when they came down the gangway, they were met by the police, who, as they began to beat them, said, "Where are your leaders? Where are your leaders?" And they said, "We're all leaders." We live in a frightening species of what the political philosopher Sheldon Wolin, our greatest living political philosopher, if you have not read Democracy Incorporated, read it, calls inverted totalitarianism. It's different from classical totalitarianism. It doesn't find its expression through a demagogue or a charismatic leader, but through the anonymity of the corporate state. And in classical totalitarian regimes, you overthrow a system, you replace it. But in inverted totalitarianism, you have corporate forces that purport to pay fealty to electoral politics, the Constitution, the iconography, and language of American patriotism. But internally, they have seized the levers of power to render the citizen impotent. A bankrupt liberal class, which mouths that feel you're paying language of liberalism and assiduously serves corporate power. Clinton, Obama. Yeah, I don't vote for Sanders. Sanders doesn't confront the war machine, but it's personal for me. I won't betray the Palestinians. I spent too long in Gaza.
Time in our minds of the bleakness that has been unleashed for decades under this global system that we call capitalism. We know, some of us firsthand, the kind of misery and oppression that is the lot for hundreds of millions, and as a matter of fact, billions on the face of this earth. We know all this. But I think there is another very important message that is being driven towards us at this moment, and we will miss that at our own peril, and that is this mood of resistance that is beginning to emerge amongst us. We saw the first signs of that with the Arab Spring, when the young people of Egypt, who had no experience in political organizing, lead the way towards the new Egyptian revolution. We saw that mood of resistance being translated into labor struggles, new labor struggles all throughout the world, including my home country, India. And it came to the shores of the United States as well, where we saw the massive public sector uprising in Wisconsin in early 2011. And we know that public sector uprising ended in defeat. But my sisters and brothers, let's not miss the fact that there was a labor uprising in the United States. Saw that mood being channeled into the Occupy movement. And I know Oakland, like Seattle, was a big center for Occupy. And contrary to what the corporate media might have us believe, movements don't exist in a vacuum of each other. Movements come as a continuum. And so for those who say that Occupy didn't succeed, and I have my own critique of Occupy, and Chris has a critique of Occupy, what Occupy did do was that for the first time, for many young people especially, there was a sense that we weren't alone. If we were feeling frustrated and outraged by the status quo, if we were feeling angry at the blatant manner in which the very banks and the hedge fund owners that led the global economy to the precipice of the abyss were the ones being rewarded in the post-recession era, and the rest of us were left with an epidemic of foreclosures and evictions, a labor market, a job market that was decimated of middle-class jobs and was mostly offering low-wage jobs to young people who were graduating out of college with student debt, tens of thousands of dollars of student debt. What Occupy did was it brought that anger out into the forefront, and for the first time in many generations gave a feeling that there was a possibility of a collective struggle. And our campaign that succeeded in 2013 in Seattle really came out of that mood of resistance. There is a common thread that binds all of these seemingly separate events. The Black Lives Matter movement, the environmental resistance that finally, at least to some degree, came to terms that Obama was going to betray on the Keystone XL pipeline question. And they encircled the White House, engaged in mass arrests. And at that event, Naomi Klein credited Occupy, the Occupy movement, as the reason why the environmental movement was experiencing a resurgence of resistance. And we've seen many smaller local struggles come up. The actions taken by the Richmond Progressive Alliance that Gail was talking about are very much in that mood. But I want to share with you, some of the details of what we've done in Seattle, because it's very important for us, for me personally, I've come from Seattle, that we all be inspired by tonight, but I also want us to be serious about the message we take from what we've done in Seattle. Because we don't want the message to be that there is something special about Seattle that this happened. It's not because it's the Pacific Northwest or because it's a hippie culture or because we wear socks with our sandals. We do, but that has nothing to do with politics. The conditions, the material conditions that should and can compel people into a political struggle exist everywhere in the world. But they play out in different ways because of certain other factors. And that is where we come in. That is where Socialist Alternative comes in. That is where you come in. That is why we are here today. And that is, I, as an Indian person, somebody who immigrated from India, I often hear from liberals, American liberals and progressives, that things are not bad enough in the United States. That is why people are not, that is why you don't have raging mass movements. If things were only much, much worse, then people will be propelled into struggle. And those material conditions have a lot to do with what people do, but that is not the only story. The reason we've had decades of a real sort of backslide of the activist layer has been because we haven't seen any victories. My sisters and brothers, a sense of victory, a sense that we could have an impact is extremely critical for us to be able to build a movement. We won't always win every struggle, but we have to win some in order to show the way, in order to show that we can actually succeed. And that is what we have done in Seattle. But what we accomplished in Seattle, as Gail correctly said, is not automatic, and it certainly does not come easy. It has to first begin with a serious analysis of the political situation around us, and that is where Socialist Alternative began. Socialist Alternative, the Oakland branch of which has organized today's event, is a nationwide organization of social and economic justice activists, and we've been engaged in every campaign, nationwide and local campaigns for social, economic, racial, and environmental justice. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we realized, as probably probably many other forces on the left, that there was an opening for left politics. And not only was there an opening, there has been a deep hunger for an alternative to corporate politics. Look at the opinion polls on US Congress. Poll after poll shows that the US Congress is less popular than just about any other unpleasant thing you can think of in this world. And I'm not joking, there was a real poll that was done that asked the respondents the question, do you like the US Congress less than root canal treatments? Do you like the US Congress less than cockroaches? The US Congress came out less popular than any of those things. And yet, I know every time I say this people laugh, but I'm trying to get to a serious bit. and this is where the insidiousness of corporate politics and not having an alternative to it comes in, yet the incumbency rate to the US Congress is almost 100%. Why is that? Because for the most part, people don't see any other alternative, and furthermore, look at the voter turnouts. The voter turnout for the last midterm election in last November was the lowest since the Second World War. What does this tell us? This tells us that the Democratic Party establishment and the Republican Party establishment, whatever the differences between them might be, exist on their own planet, where their single-minded goal is the defense of the Wall Street agenda. And out here, we have this huge chasm where virtually the entire American population, working people exist, who don't see electoral politics as addressing their day-to-day needs in any way whatsoever. Moreover, we feel betrayed. And that is why there is a deep sense of disenchantment and disengagement from politics. And we saw, socialist alternatives saw, that there was an open door for left politics. And this is where it is important to recognize that it is not automatic, because it's one thing to recognize that there is an opening, it's yet another to actually run a campaign to demonstrate in real life what an alternative to corporate politics looks like. What does a pro-working class campaign, what does a truly principled campaign look like? Most of the generations that exist today haven't seen that. And that is what electrified the people of Seattle when we launched our campaign. We were told by the political pundits, you should be timid. And for God's sake, do you have to say you're a socialist at every speech you make? What we did was throw the rule book out the window. They said, be timid. We were audacious. They said, hide that you're a socialist. We said, we're socialists. They said, they said, be vague about your campaign platform. We were absolutely sharp about where we stood. Our campaign called for a $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle. For affordable housing and rent control, and for a tax on millionaires to fund transit and public education. We were told, you have to take money from whoever is willing to give money to you. I was sat down by a prominent Democratic Party politician who said, you have to take money from corporations. This is simply not going to work. And our response was, well, that depends on what you're trying to achieve. And we took not a penny from corporations, and when we launched our campaign, we had no idea we were going to win. But at that moment, that wasn't so much the point. The point was to show a direction away from corporate politics, from the parties that are thoroughly aligned with the forces of capitalism, towards something that can allow working people to begin having a vision of independent organizing, organizing independent of corporate forces and the politicians that are beholden to them. And when we did that, we had energized an entire base of people in Seattle, all the way from high school students to retirees, who for one moment couldn't believe what was happening. There was one incident that I wanted to share with you when I was out with our campaigners at our campaign table, handing out campaign leaflets and talking to people. And there was this woman who walked, from a distance looking right at me. And I thought she was going to have a heavy critique of how how objectionable it was that we had broken from the Democratic Party. Instead, she came right to me and asked me, "Are you for real?" And that meant, those words captured the fact that a real working class agenda has been so absent from politics that people don't know what it looks like. And that is why it is incumbent upon us not only to discuss these issues in the abstract, but to run campaigns, but like Gail said, not run campaigns as an end in themselves, but campaigns that are rooted in the struggles of the working class and campaigns that are launched from the ground up. And that is exactly the kind of campaign we ran. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't also mention that it was important that when we launched this campaign through Socialist Alternative, it was not something that one person decided to do. I was the candidate, I am the city council member, but the campaign didn't begin because I woke up one morning and thought I was going to run a campaign and become famous. And I'm saying that somewhat flippantly, but it's true. If we want our elected officials to be accountable, then those campaigns have to be rooted in democratic organizations, not Democratic Party, but democratic organizations, which have democratic structures where whether or not to run a campaign is a subject of democratic discussion and debate and vote, and who the candidate should be is a subject of democratic discussion, debate, and vote. That is the kind of political organization we need, and that is the vision that Socialist Alternative will hold forward for all of us, for the working class, that we need an alternative to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party establishments. But the only way to do it is to build our own party. We need an independent party for working people. And if that message energizes you, my sisters and brothers, then please hear my appeal. It is absolutely critical that we win the re-election campaign this year in Seattle. And I can tell you this, if the mandate of working people in our district was the only determinant of election outcomes, we would have won many times over. However, we live in the world in which politics is completely bathed with corporate money and corruption and cynicism. And that is what we are finding in attacks in Seattle. But let's be clear, every victory in Seattle will have reverberating effects all throughout the nation. And every defeat will as well. All eyes are on Seattle this year, this fall. And so, every donation you make today will help us counter the corporate machinery, the corporate beast that we face there, just like everywhere else. We know that a super PAC, everybody knows what a super PAC is. A super PAC has been formed where every possible developer, every possible slumlord in Seattle, every possible corporation and corporate lobby that fought against $15 an hour, tooth and nail, every timber company, all sorts of companies have donated to that super PAC. And that money is going to be unleashed on us in the rest of September and October. And we have absolutely no room to be complacent. And that is why I'm here with the message of working people in Seattle, that we need you to stand with us, because the only way we can build any successful movement is if we do it together. And that is why our campaign's outcome should matter to you, and that is why your contributions matter to us. So I would appeal to you all in closing. Whatever you had decided to contribute in terms of campaign donations to this campaign, please think bigger. Just imagine, we can't run this campaign on empty. And every penny you donate to this campaign goes into leaflets and all the energy that we are pouring into a massive door-knocking campaign throughout our district to make sure that all working people of all ethnicities know that this is their campaign, that this is not my campaign, it's their campaign, and they need us to win, just like we need their votes. But we need your money because we are competing with CEO donations. For any of you, for myself, giving even a small donation is going to be a big sacrifice. For Brad Tilden, the CEO of Alaska Airlines, or Carl Hagelin, who is a well-known slumlord in Seattle, making a $700 donation is no sacrifice. So we will not be able to compete with big donations from them, but we will be able to compete with them with our hearts and our souls, and pouring that into this campaign. And I guarantee you that every single one of the 500 to 1,000 volunteers we are mobilizing in Seattle to have the biggest door-knocking campaign Seattle has ever seen is going to thank every dollar that you contribute here. Thank you for every dollar that you contribute here in Oakland. Thank you so much.
That was great. I hope everyone is as pumped as I am after hearing all of our great speakers tonight. Now this is where the rubber meets the road for building an alternative to the corporate-funded political establishment. We're going to have Brian come up to the stage to talk to us briefly about how to really win this thing, and then we'll move into the question and answer session.